Hello, this is Sarah Glidden at the Mass Cultural Council. I'm hoping you can hear me. I have unmuted the Zoom meeting. If you can hear me, can you just type in the chat box that you can hear me? Fabulous. I'm seeing a couple of you telling me that it's all good. That's delightful. I'm here with my coworker, Olivia, and I'm going to be talking about our projects program today, and Olivia is going to be helping me as I field any of your questions as they come through. My plan for the most part is to leave questions for the end, but if you have a question that really is right on topic for what I'm talking about at that moment, I will try to feed it into the presentation, and Olivia's going to bop me over the head when those questions pop up in our chat box. So again, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm here today to talk about our projects grant program, which is part of our cultural investment portfolio. That is our organizational support program. There's no video specifically, there's just the slides from the PowerPoint. So that, I hope that's coming through for everybody okay. I'm going to talk about the projects program in general, how an organization is eligible to apply, what makes a project eligible, and then the application and review process, and then some tips and suggestions, although I'll be weaving some of those in throughout. So as I mentioned, the cultural investment portfolio, that's our organizational support program. The great majority of our funding happens through the portfolio itself, which is unrestricted operating support. And that's for organizations where we have a long-term and consistent history of funding. They no longer have to apply. They continue to get funding as long as they stay eligible and meet their annual requirements. The Gateway program is our program for organizations to move into the portfolio. Applications are taken every other year. Applications were due back on February 1st, and the next application cycle for that will be February of 2020, which will probably be here before we know it. In the current fiscal year, we have 65 project grantees. That's this program. It's a $2,500 grant. We funded approximately 50% of last year's applications. So a couple of these images as we go along are from projects that we've funded in the last year or two, and I just liked their images, so I wanted to share. So the projects program, it's specific project support. So it's not operating support. You have to identify a specific thing that you are doing that we're going to fund. Your organization can apply year after year. You can apply for the same project that you repeat, or it could be something brand new every year. So you don't have to create something just to apply to this. You can take something that you're currently doing and look at it and to see if it's eligible and apply. Applications are due on May 1st of 2018, by which time we hope the snow will have stopped. Applications are due by 11:59 p.m. This is a computerized online application. At midnight, it automatically shuts down, and no matter where you are in the process of working on your application, at 1 second till midnight, if you have not hit submit, it will not be submitted. And at that point, we can't accept it. So please make sure to give yourself plenty of time. Sadly, I did have an organization 2 years ago that was within 2 minutes of finishing, and then midnight hit, and their application turned into a pumpkin, and they couldn't do anything about it. So we don't want that to happen. So who can apply for a project grant? First of all, Massachusetts recognized 501c3, that's nonprofit organizations. If you're a non-Massachusetts organization, but you're doing work in the Commonwealth, you do have to be registered with the Secretary of the Commonwealth as a foreign corporation to be able to apply to this program. Programs that are agencies or departments within government entities can also apply. Local cultural councils that do their own programming may apply. They can't apply to this program to re-grant this money elsewhere, but they can apply if they can apply if they're doing their own programming. I'm having a question here about how to show my slides larger. I'm gonna try, and we're gonna see how's that? Whoever just told me there was an issue, can you tell me if it's coming across better? Fabulous, thank you so much, glad it's working. Okay, so unincorporated associations may apply. So if you're not actually incorporated, or if you have incorporated but you don't have your 501c3 status yet, you may apply if you're using a fiscal agent. And if you're one of the organizations that is using a fiscal agent, I'm going to get into that a little bit more, but I can also talk to you offline. If you received a project grant in fiscal 18, you may reapply for fiscal 19. We do not stop you from reapplying. Finally, if you are one of our portfolio grantees, you may not apply. And if you get a gateway grant, in this year you can apply, but if you get the gateway grant, we're going to give you the gateway grant instead of the projects grant. So okay, we're now figuring out how to move to the next slide, having changed how it is being viewed online. And the fabulous Olivia has identified what to do next. Okay, so I'm sorry, I'm going to, beg your pardon for the confusion here. So I have a little more information about who can apply. Slides are a little out of order, it seems. If you're a local cultural council, as I mentioned, you can apply. If you are applying to local cultural councils, you may also apply to this program. So being funded by a local cultural council does not stop you from applying to this program. If you receive funding from our festivals grant program, you may also apply to this. So, I see this here. So, again, organization eligibility. Your organization has to have cash expenses of $10,000 in the most recent closed out fiscal year. So if you're at $9,985, I'm sorry, you're not going to be eligible to apply. It does have to be at that threshold of $10,000. You have to have 2 years of cultural programming under your belt. So this is not your startup year. The project that you apply for has to have a minimum cash budget of $5,000, and there is no maximum budget size. Project can be as big as it needs to be. I frequently get questions about whether or not in-kind expenses will count. And no, in-kind expenses and contributions do not count. They have to be cash expenses, expenses that go in and out of your bank account. Budgeted income for the project has to match the budgeted expenses, and I'm going to come back to that. And that includes this grant. Honestly, this is the single largest issue that trips up applicants. So that's why I'm coming back to it a second time, because I really don't want that to be a problem for you. So the project that you apply for has to take place between June 1st, 2018 and June 30th of 2019. That's a 13-month period. That's a change this year. It used to be the 12 months starting July 1st and going to the following June 30th. And we realized that was creating lots of trouble for our organizations that were doing summer programming. So now it's a 13-month period. And we realize if you have a project that's taking place June 15th, you are probably doing some work and even spending some money before June 1st. For the purposes of this project application, you can only include the expenses and activities that take place during this 13-month period. So if some of your planning and other work overlaps into a different fiscal year, you should probably address that in the application itself so that we know that you understand what we're doing and what your requirements are in this. There's my information about festivals and local cultural council grants. Like I mentioned, our Gateway program is an every other year application. We received applications on February 1st of this year. Those applications are currently being considered and scored by panelists. If you apply to this program and to the Gateway program as well, if you get a Gateway grant, we will take you out of contention for the projects grants. But if you want to apply for a project grant as a backup in case you don't get the Gateway grant, That's perfectly okay. We decided it really wasn't fair or reasonable to make you figure out which one you were most competitive for, that we figured you should be allowed to submit to both programs and be, considered as much as possible. So, I said, if you are an unincorporated organization, or if you are incorporated but don't have your 501c3 yet, you can apply working with a fiscal agent. The grant contract that we issue will be with the fiscal agent, and they will handle the funds on your behalf. When you fill out the application, you are the applicant. And that should be the information that you fill into the organizational profile on the online application form. There's a specific section where you identify who your fiscal agent is, who the contact person is at the fiscal agent, and their address, contact information, tax ID number, etc. You can work with one of our existing grantees as a fiscal agent. Doesn't affect their eligibility or your eligibility. So for example, if the Arts and Business Council of Greater Boston is your fiscal agent, they are also a portfolio grantee. This is not a problem. If you are incorporated, don't fill out the fiscal agent section. That'll just confuse us when we download all the information and try to put it into our analysis programs. So, what is a project for this particular program? First of all, we talk about public programming in the arts, humanities, and interpretive sciences. If you've never heard of what interpretive sciences are, what we're talking about is organizations that are interpreting the natural world for the greater public. So zoos, aquariums, botanical gardens, watershed associations, lots of organizations that are working in the sciences, but education and public programming is a significant part of that work. A project can be a one-time activity, or it can be an activity that you repeat for multiple years. For example, you might be an orchestra that does Handel's Messiah every December, and you want to apply year after year for Handel's Messiah. That is perfectly okay. Or it can be a one-time thing. You might be an organization that has decided to do a particular arts education program that only happens once. That's perfectly okay. It does need to be a distinct aspect of your activities. So for example, like I just mentioned, it can be a one-time event, a single production, or an exhibition. It can be an educational seminar, or it can be a series of related events. For example, a lecture series or art classes. Let's say you do concerts all over New England. You could pick just the Massachusetts concerts, and that could be the project. Or if you have a summer program, that could be your project. What's important to us is that the project is not your complete programmatic activity. Think of it this way. If we looked at your project and we took your project away, are you still doing something? If you're not, then what you've really applied for is operating support, and we're not going to consider your application. So think about that. If you have some confusion about your particular organization and how you can make sense of that for what you're doing, contact me and we can talk. I'll help you try to figure it out. We don't fund fundraising, strategic planning, capacity building, or economic development grants. Again, this goes back to the public programming. Those things, fundraising, et cetera, are really for your organization alone, and we want this to be about programs that reach the greater public. We don't fund programming outside of Massachusetts. So again, let's say you are a theater company and you do a tour that goes into New Hampshire. You can't apply for the New Hampshire portion of your project, just the Massachusetts portion. We don't fund capital expenditures, and you can go on our website and see a much more complete description of what capital expenditures are. But for example, we're not going to fund your purchase of computers. We're not going to fund your improvement of your facility. This is about programming. We don't fund individuals as applicants, only organizations. So if, let's say, you are an individual artist and you want to do an exhibition of your own work, in this case, you're an individual. If the gallery which is eligible as a nonprofit or working with a fiscal agent. If a gallery wants to present your work as an exhibition in their annual programming, they can apply, but you as an individual cannot apply. We do not fund projects that are exclusively for or by students as part of the activities of a college or school. So if you are the on-campus music series and you're doing work that's exclusively for your student population, it's not going to be eligible. It really does need to be something about engaging the greater public. We do not fund re-granting of our monies in the form of prizes or scholarships. If you're doing something and there's a prize component, take the prize out of it for the purpose of the budget for this project. If you're still meeting the eligibility requirement of a $5,000 project, then you can apply for the rest of the project. You just don't include the cash prizes. You might, however, want to describe in your project description that prizes are going to be given to the winners of this competition, simply that the funding for those prizes is not coming from this grant program. Again, we ask you to think of it this way. If we really wanted to give money to those individuals or the re-granting that you want to do, we could give money directly to them. We really want to give this money to you to do the programming. So the criteria for your application falls into three broad categories. The quality of the project itself, which will include having a clear project description and plan with specific goals, relevance to your mission and to your other programming. Another category is public value. How does this benefit the community served? And what is your effort and success in reaching diverse communities? And then finally, your organization's capacity to actually do this project well, having appropriate staff, appropriate financial capability, and evidence of strong planning and evaluation. I'm going to get into the individual questions that relate to those categories. So what happens if you get a grant? These are going to be your requirements. You need to engage in and report on an advocacy activity, and we'll give you guidance about that. An advocacy activity is you connecting with your state legislators. That would be either your state rep, your state senator, or the governor or lieutenant governor's office. These are people who have the power to influence the state budget process and hence our ability to give you grants because it's about our funding. We expect that your advocacy is not specifically about your organization and the great work you're doing, although that's always a great example to use. It's really about the field as a whole. It can be done quite easily. For example, if you get a grant, write to your legislator and thank them for their work in supporting the budget of the Mass Cultural Council, because that's what made it possible for you to get this grant and to do the great work that you're doing in your community. We expect public acknowledgement of your Mass Cultural Council funding. Photograph here shows the fabulous folks at the Canal District Alliance, and that's our old logo, so you'll be expected to use our new logo, but a nice effort on their part to acknowledge all of their supporters, including the Mass Cultural Council. You'll need to submit a final report, which I swear to you is quite easy. The questions are pretty much along the lines of, did you do the project you said you were going to do? If you didn't, why not? And what did you learn from it? And then we ask for a budget. Also, you need to match our grant one-to-one with non-state funding. So as I mentioned previously, it's a $5,000 minimum project size, and our grant is a flat $2,500. So if you do a $5,000 project, obviously $2,500 has to come from other sources. They cannot come from state sources. So for example, your local cultural council funding would not be eligible for that. If you get funding from Mass Humanities, that's not eligible. But funds that you get from individual donors, from revenues associated with the project, corporate support, all of that is eligible. And I'm going to get into the budget in a little more detail in just a moment. So how do you actually apply for this? You go to our website, first of all, and you will find the full guidelines at massculturalcouncil.org. A little picture there of our homepage as it currently appears. And if you see towards the top of our homepage, there's a black line that says Grant Programs, applications/forms, services, and news. Click on applications, forms, and you'll find cultural investment portfolio. And the very first thing on the list will be project grants. There's a sample of the application. There will, tomorrow, weather permitting, be a link to a recording of this webinar. And there is also a link to the online application program. I'm going to repeat it here because I simply can't repeat it often enough. The application is due on May 1st, 2018 at 11:59 minutes and 59 seconds p.m. You can find the application itself at mass.gosmart.org. You'll find the application, which includes a narrative, a project budget, and a place for you to list websites. Things like YouTube or your own personal website or your Facebook page, places where if the panel feels like they need to see more information about your organization and your project, they can go to that to learn about you. There are no required attachments. You don't need to provide us with a copy of your 501c3 or an audit or a tax return or anything else. All you need is this application. And this is what it looks like. So if you go to mass.gosmart.org, that's where you log in. If you have logged in before, if you have an account where you applied for this program or a cultural facilities fund grant, you've already got a login, password, and username. Use the same one because any previous applications that you've done are linked to that username. If you start a new username, none of your other applications will be linked to it. If you're pretty sure you have a username and password and you can't find it, shoot me an email. I can look it up and help you with that. But don't just start a new login and password or we'll end up having a half a dozen of them for your one organization. Once you've logged in, click on Current Programs and Applications. That's up towards the top of the page. And you scroll down and you will find Cultural Investment Portfolio Projects FY19. I also encourage you, if you have logged in before, you should take a moment to look at Edit Profile. That's going to show us the information we currently have about your organization. If you've moved, if you have a new address, a new phone number, if somebody new from your organization is handling this information and you want them to be the contact person, you should change that information in the Edit Profile section because that information automatically carries over into your application. Also, just a word of advice, I know that a lot of you have applied to local cultural councils, and for the last 2 years, that's been an online application. It is actually an entirely separate online application platform. So your username and password for that program will not carry over to this, entirely separate. A few tips. And there's another one of our fabulous project grantees. Proofread a PDF of your application and your organization overview before you submit it. It'll allow you to eliminate typos and any weird characters. Sometimes when the program converts your application into a PDF, it changes some formatting from bold or italics or quotation marks into all kinds of strange, bizarro characters. It'd be really great if you can catch that before you submit it. And a piece of advice, really look at your user profile. You would be astonished at the number of organizations that put a typo in either their username, their organization name, or their email address. And it's harder for us to reach you if there's a typo in your email address. It does happen, so please. I encourage you to type the text for the application in a word processing software. It allows you to do spell check. It also is an easy way for you to count the characters that you're typing in so that you can match up to the character limit on the application form. Answer the questions completely and specifically. Assume that the panel doesn't know you or your work. We've had questions from folks where the panel has been confused about something and then the applicant says, but that was in the application last year. The panel is a completely different set of people. They don't know what you wrote last year. They might not know you. Our panelists come from all over the state and from a variety of disciplines. So assume that they don't know you, and you need to provide enough context for them to understand your application all on its own. Save. This program does not automatically save your information, so you can spend all kinds of time writing your fabulous application narrative, and then if you don't click save at the bottom of the page, it won't save it, and if you close it down, you will have wasted all of your time. So make a point of saving. And yeah, it seems to me that in this day and age, there should be a program that automatically saves, but this one doesn't. So please, for your own heartbreak, save. Also, it has not submitted until you click the submit button. So again, if you do fabulous work and you close it down and you forget all about it, May 1st can come and go, and there's no application to us. If you do click submit, you will get an automated email that says, thank you for submitting. So you'll know that you submitted because you're going to get that email. If you work on the program and you shut it down without submitting, you're going to get an automated email that reminds you that you still need to submit it. We really want that to happen. So these are the questions that we ask you in this application. First of all, provide a complete description of the proposed project, including the project's goals and objectives. We want you to tell us what you're doing. Make it nice, clear, straightforward language. How does this project relate to your mission and other core programming? There are two things going on here. One, we want to know why you're doing this particular project and how it relates to everything else you're doing. This is also your chance to remind us that you do other things, and that goes to eligibility. Again, we won't fund your entire programmatic activity. This is your place to let us know that there is other programmatic activity. If you are, let's say, a chamber orchestra and you have submitted your entire season as a project, and you tell me in this question, well, this is our core programming and we don't do anything else, it's our season, it's going to be a red flag for us. We want to know how the project benefits your community. How have you assessed community need or interest for a project of this type? And what are the demographics and number of people you plan to serve, if applicable? So I mentioned participants or target audiences because sometimes it's the people doing the work that you are trying to serve, and sometimes it's an audience that is either sitting in seats or coming and visiting your event. Both of those are legitimate populations to be serving. And an example, let's say you have a chamber orchestra that provides an opportunity to work on period instruments for Romantic era music. That's a little unusual. Maybe this is their only chance to get to play with a professional conductor. That could be part of why you're doing it, that you want to serve that set of musicians. You also want to serve the audience that can then come and hear the concert. How have you assessed community need or interest for a project of this type? Don't give us your opinion as fact. Everybody loves Bach. You know what? Not everybody loves Bach. I find that shocking, but not everybody loves Bach. So you can say, we've done concerts in the past and audiences have really responded when we've done Bach. That's a fact. Use facts. What are the demographics and number of people you plan to serve, if that's an appropriate piece of information for your particular project? Just a word of advice here. We do not consider the number of people that you're serving as a requirement for or something that we score on. It's of interest when we're looking at your project description, but your project that reaches 10 people might be reaching them in a really deep and meaningful and life-changing way versus another project that has 15,000 people in an audience. Those are both legitimate projects, and we're not going to give priority to one over the other because they're both legitimate. Each application is looked at on its own and scored against the criteria, not against other applications that we're looking at. Just a piece of advice here, be interesting. Look at your project and think about what's special about this. Why would someone's attention be caught by this particular project description? I'm going to give you some examples. We get a lot of applications from choirs, and a lot of applications from choirs saying, it's our 35th anniversary. That's great. That's meaningful to you. that is not in and of itself something that is exciting to an audience member. I have never gone to a concert because it's an organization's 35th anniversary. I've gone to a concert because the programming is interesting. Now, it being your 35th anniversary might be the reason why you're doing something particularly interesting, but that's your motivation. So try to think about, what is it about your project that's compelling? Okay. Continuation. Describe your plans to reach diverse communities such as ethnically and economically diverse, rural, elderly, veterans, and people with disabilities. Describe your past efforts if applicable. Don't tell us that you've done ASL interpretation if ASL interpretation is not relevant to this particular project. That doesn't really help us understand if you're doing an effective job of reaching diverse communities. Think about this as it is reasonable and relevant to your organization. If you are in a rural area, you're probably reaching a lot of people from a rural area, and that's great. This is going to sound ridiculous, but it's just a piece of advice. Just because all the work you do fits into the category of reaching diverse communities, don't omit an answer. If you are an Asian film festival, state right up front, we're an Asian film festival, and so our project is going to reach a lot of people who are Asian. Tell us. Don't assume that we're going to put 2 and 2 together and come up with 4. Again, we have provided you with a variety of populations that you might be trying to reach. We want to know that you are looking outside your own front door to see who's out in the world and to make sure that you're reaching folks. But we don't expect you to invent people who are not in your community. A question about your budget. We want you to tell us how you figured it out. For example, if you're paying artist fees that are determined by a union, tell us that we're paying fees based on union requirements, or that you're paying fees that are comparable to, the prevailing wage for that kind of work. If you're including administrative work as part of your application, tell us that you are calculating that based on a percentage of the time of that employee who's working on this particular project. So the budget gives us numbers. This is your chance to tell us how you came up with those numbers. And really importantly, if your organization has had a deficit, this is your place to tell us why or why not that deficit affects your ability to do this project. If we see that you lost a lot of money last year and you're taking on something ambitious, our panel is going to be concerned about your organization's capacity to actually do this project. This is your place where you tell us, yes, this project is twice our budget from last year, but we've already got a commitment for funding for 2/3 of the project. So again, this is your chance to make sure that the panel doesn't have questions once they've read your application. We want you to tell us how you're going to execute and evaluate this project, your plans to reach your target audiences and participants. Provide a detailed timeline and include dates if possible, and describe your criteria and plans to evaluate the success of the project. So that sounds like a lot of things, and we actually do expect you to put all of the answers in this one question. And it relates back to other questions. So in the beginning of the application, if you've described your project and you've told us that success is reaching 20% more people than last year and knowing that they had a particular experience, then your evaluation should reference that. A detailed timeline is really helpful. Again, if our panel has questions about whether or not you have proposed something that is operating support versus a project, seeing that you have a start and a completion date for the project helps us figure out that this really is a specific project. Also, we actually try to attend some of your projects. So I should be able to look at your application and know when I should be in your neighborhood to show up and see your project. If you have audiences that you're trying to reach, we'd like to know how you're going to reach them. Again, I'm going to music because it's an easy example and I have a background in music. Don't tell me you're just going to reach music lovers. I don't know how you're going to do that. Tell me that you have a mailing list and you use social media and that you do postering in your community and that you have a subscriber base that has come to other concerts. Then I know what you're actually going to do to reach this audience. I should be able to read the answer to this question and have a sense of what your organization is doing to actually reach the audience. Who are the key participants involved in creating and implementing the project, and what are their qualifications? So you might be working with an art teacher who is from your local high school, and the fact that they're an art teacher tells me that they have qualifications. So this is your chance to tell us who's doing the work and how do you know that they're qualified to do it. So the budget. This is the budget page. And obviously, if you log in, you can see it nice and clearly. You'll see there's a line there right before you start putting in numbers that says total project cash income must equal, capital letters there, must equal total project cash expense. This is really important. We're looking for a project where the revenues that you bring in cover the costs of doing the project. If you've got a loss on this project, we're going to wonder how that affects your organization's health. If you've got a surplus, we're going to wonder, why do you need the state's money to do this project? If your project shows a surplus, it could affect whether or not we even review your application. So this line about project expenses must equal project income is really important to us, and it is the single most frequently problematic portion of applicants to this program. There's a line there for administrative expenses and the salaries and fees. It's okay. It's in fact encouraged that you pay the folks who work for you for the work they're doing on this project. So think about, what's your administrative cost in doing this project? But also think about how much of this budget is administrative overhead. If we look at this application and 50% of your expenses are administrative overhead, we're going to look at that carefully, and that will be conveying information to the panelists. And when I say we, I really mean the panelists, because they're the ones discussing this and they're the ones scoring the application. If you are paying staff who will be running this program, teaching this program, performing in it, programming the project, they really shouldn't be included under administrative. They should be under artists, humanists, scientists. They could possibly be listed as technical support for the project. Think about what they're doing. Administrative in this case really should be office support, other overhead administrative expenses. Only include the expenses that are taking place in Massachusetts, not the expenses that happen out of state. Here's the income page. Oh, look, I've repeated that project expenses must equal project income. I really want that to be right. Secondly, you must include this grant under state government. There's a line there in the contributed income section. It says state government, enter $2,500 for this grant unless anticipating other funds from state agencies. So if you think you're getting money from local cultural councils or Mass Humanities, you can add that number in and have more than $2,500. If you don't put $2,500 in on this line, we're going to automatically add $2,500 to your revenue for the project, and then we're going to wonder if your project revenue exceeds your project expenses. So please put that in. If your project revenue, let's say you're doing a festival and people are buying tickets and vendors are paying for booths, so you've got earned revenue, maybe local businesses are helping sponsor, all those different revenues, and maybe still with all the revenues that you expect attached to this project, it doesn't cover your expenses, and yet you're still planning to do this project because it's really important to you. You should tell us where the revenue comes from, where the money's coming from. And you see here the lines that have names on them. The actual application online has some blank lines where you can give us different categories that are appropriate to your application. So in the case of a project where your revenues that are directly associated to the project don't cover your expenses, you can tell us that you're pulling from applicant cash or applicant reserves. Just tell us that you know that the project isn't in balance until you've added this money in. So you create a line that shows us how you're balancing the budget for this particular project. Keith Lockhart wants to know if you have any questions. I know I've given you a lot, but if you have questions, I'm happy to answer them now. If you don't have questions right now, but you want to think about it, give it some thought, and follow up, you can email me. Really great question about whether or not matching funds need to be already secured. They don't, because you might be expecting that ticket sales the day of the event are going to help cover it. And I will email this PowerPoint presentation to all of the folks who signed up for this webinar. You may only submit one project application. And if let's say you're a college or a university that has a lot of cultural programming that might be eligible, you have to pick one and only submit one project application. My goodness, I've answered every question. I'm feeling very pleased with myself. Oh, can one show that's free to audience within a festival series of ticketed events count as a project? So I want to make sure I'm answering this correctly. If we're talking about, let's say, the run of a play and one particular performance is free, I think it's a little hard to figure out how that's actually a project. If, however, it's a series of concerts and one particular concert is free, absolutely, that can be a project. If that doesn't really answer your question, give me a call, send me an email, and we can chat and you can explain in more detail what you're thinking about, and I will address that. Sometimes I realize what folks are doing is looking at their programming and trying to figure out how they can package something to make it a reasonable project. Just some factoids. We get applications from all over the Commonwealth, and although it isn't something that we have weighted into the application evaluation, we also find that our funding geographically very closely mirrors the applications that we get. So if 20% of our applications are from the Cape and Islands, then 20% of our grants are going to the Cape and Islands. It's just kind of worked out that way. About 35% of our organizations that apply have budgets of under $100,000. And about 35% of our grants have gone to organizations with budgets of under $100,000. We do fund projects as small as $5,000, and we've got about a dozen organizations with budgets under $12,000 that have applied successfully. So being small is not going to work against you. You do have to have 2 years of programming in your background. Now, it doesn't have to be the exact same scale of programming that you're doing now, but we're looking at organizations that have put a little activity behind them, gives them a chance to learn from that, to move on and do this. But that's a really good question about whether or not an organization that's just really starting up in their programming can apply. If you're an organization that's been working with a fiscal agent, but you've just switched over to being a 501c3, we will consider the time that you have spent in programming as a non-incorporated or a not yet 501c3 organization. That will count as your eligible time. So we're not looking at you having changed your eligibility status just because you've gone from being unincorporated to being incorporated. So when I send out the slide deck, I will give you my email and my phone number so you can follow up. You can also find that on our website, massculturalcouncil.org. Take a look at our guidelines. You'll find that a lot of your questions are answered there, but I'm happy to go into more depth. So the scoring process, we will have a panel of folks, again, from cultural and interpretive science organizations, folks from all over the Commonwealth. They will read the applications. There are 7 questions on the application. They will give you scores from 1 to 5 on each question on the application. And those scores get compiled, and then the applications get ranked. And we fund as many of them as we can make budget to fund. Like I said, for the last 2 years, we've funded about 50% of the applications. This goes back to the advocacy issue. Your advocacy, your talking to your state rep and your state senator is incredibly meaningful. Even if they are already supporters of funding for the Mass Cultural Council, it's really helpful for them to hear from you and you telling them that this is an important thing for your community. If we have more money, I can advocate internally for more organizations to get funded. And let me just give you a little calendar information. So this application's due May 1st. The panels are going to meet in late June to score the applications. And then we compile the list and we submit to our governing body, that is the Mass Cultural Council. We submit to them a funding recommendation list that they approve. That typically happens in late August or very early September. At that point, we notify you whether or not you have gotten a grant. I will also have some compiled comments from the panelists that will be sent out to you, whether you get funded or not. And I have a lot of conversations with folks afterwards about the comments and about the scoring, and happy to talk to you. And I've definitely had organizations that have applied 1 year, not gotten funded, have taken their feedback and applied the next year. So you will definitely get information. You'll have the opportunity to talk to me in more depth after the process to find out what happened with your particular evaluation. Like I said, we funded 65 projects this past year, and there were concerts, there were theatrical productions, there were art exhibitions, there were public art projects, there were arts therapy programs, there were, an interesting project where a community was doing a mural, and the mural artist worked with a local group of kids to actually create the mural topic and then to create the mural itself. So he did hands-on work with the kids to teach them how to paint. The award decisions are made, they're made internally, but they are, during the summer, they are published and made available to you once our governing council has met, and that's typically the last week of August or first week of September. So if you have a project that takes place during the summer, yeah, you're probably not going to hear from us until after your project has taken place. So you need to go into this process so that you know that you can afford to do your project during the summer, even if you haven't gotten the funding. And what's different about this from the local cultural council process, this is a grant right up front. You don't have to submit receipts. What's going to happen is we will mail a contract out to you. You mail the contract back to us, and direct deposit happens, and like magic, money appears in your bank account. So you don't have to wait until after you've spent the money to get a reimbursement. We do the evaluation of the applications as a whole. So we don't have separate panels for visual arts versus theater versus education programs. They're all seen together, and the chips fall where the chips fall. So we do not say, nope, we have funded our allotment of chamber music organizations, not doing any more of those. If we got 65 fabulous chamber music applications, and that's what the panel ranked top, that's what would get funded. It'd be a really bizarre situation because we see an incredible diversity of applications. I have a question here about projects that happen at a school but still are community events. Absolutely, but it's going to be your job in the application to really make it clear to us that this is not just for the participants at that school. So make sure when you're talking about your target audience of participants and audience, exactly how that is relating to the general public. It's a question to you. You need to answer it in a way that makes it clear to us that this really isn't just about the school. And typically that means more than just letting the doors be open so that people can come in. It really means that you are engaging in some way. Just trying to think of all the things that might be helpful to you. Summer 18, okay, here's a question. For summer 18 projects, how can expenses and income be equal if this grant doesn't get awarded till later? And the question is, we'd have to have a loss at the time of the event. Yes, if you've got a summer 18 project, you're not going to know if you got the grant until after your project is over, and you're not going to have the money to spend. So you're going to know internally that you can cover the cost of this. And although we will look at your application and expect that your budget balances, we know it's not going to be balanced as of August 30th. It's going to be balanced once you get the money from us. We do a lot of funding of projects that take place during the summer. So these organizations have obviously thought about their cash flow concerns, if that is a concern. And they also have to know that they can take the risk that they might not get funded. And in that case, is this a challenge for their organization? It's just a fact of life with our fiscal year and the timeline for evaluating things. I know that can be problematic, but we do get a lot of summer projects being proposed. We're actually coming up on 55 minutes. Thank you for sticking with me. If you have any other questions, like I said, give me a call, send me an email. If you have questions before you get the email from me that has the slide deck, you can always find me on our website under the staff listing. My name is Sarah Glidden. I'm a program manager with the Cultural Investment Portfolio, our organizational support program. If you're interested in the Gateway program for future applications, happy to talk to you, but I promise you I'll be more available to talk to you about Gateway in the fall after we have finished the application process for this year. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope this has been helpful to you. Take a look at the materials. Send me your questions. Happy to help you. Thank you so much. Bye-bye. Maybe more.